All right, everyone. It's Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, breaking down the game we love each and every day with the best bloggers, broadcasters, and writers in the industry. If you love to bet football and you love to help out a good cause, please grab the link in the description section below. The hashtag is SamStrong. It is an offer that we've got from BetNow in correlation and cooperation with St. Jude's Hospital, basically to help out young Sam, the son of Bobby Johnson from Volunteer Roadshow. And basically the deal is that you can set up an account at BetNow, use the promo code. Make sure you do this. Use the promo code MRTV, Mark Rogers TV, MRTV CFB, Mark Rogers TV College Football, MRTV CFB. It's down in the description section below. You get an extra 50% added to your account balance. All right, we got Palmer Toms on the line from 247 Sports Georgia platform. Palmer, how you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on, Mark. I'm really excited to talk some Georgia football.
Absolutely. Boy, it's been a close call 2 straight years, and we'll dive into that in just a second. But as we get close to fall camp starting in just a few days, what are some of those storylines and position previews that you're looking at, that the battles for starting spots that intrigue you?
Yeah, the team reports for camp on Thursday, and I think the biggest question in the room is the wide receiver position. Georgia took combined hits from the NFL draft as well as the dismissal of Jeremiah Holloman in early June. So with that all added up, the Bulldogs are going to be without their top 5 leading receivers from last season. DeAndre Swift returns as the leading reception guy with 32 receptions for 297 yards and 3 touchdowns. In the wide receiver room, it goes to Tyler Simmons, who had just 9 receptions for 138. And so obviously that room's going to be the biggest question. I think guys like George Pickens, Demetrius Robertson, Lawrence Cager, Dominic Blaylock, those are some of the guys that can step up. Cager is a graduate transfer from Miami who's coming in with some experience, whereas some of the other guys are newer to college football.
Talking Georgia football here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. We got Palmer Toms on the line from Dogs at 247 Sports. So, of course, 247 Sports, you know it's quality football coverage for the Dogs. So please join him and the rest of the staff right there. The defensive side of the ball, I think this has been one of the more talented units in college football. Certainly, Palmer, correct me if I'm wrong. I watch not every game. I watch the big games. I see Georgia probably play 6 or 8 times per year, but I would think that the defensive productivity last year was maybe not quite what it was expected to be based on the talent and the recruiting. The linebacker play, again, very good based on most people's standards, but based on the elite athletes there, maybe they need an upgrade at the linebacker position and more productivity out of those guys.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think a lot of people were concerned about Georgia's lack of getting to the quarterback. They were one of the lowest teams in the country in sacks, ranked in the 80s. And so they lose 5 big contributors from that defense. Jonathan Ledbetter, Juwan Taylor, Natrez Patrick, DeAndre Walker, and DeAndre Baker. Baker's obviously the biggest loss, being the Thorpe Award winner from last year and first-round draft pick of the New York Giants. And so I think a lot of people are looking at that cornerback position as a potential weakness of sorts. I think it'll be Tyson Campbell and Eric Stokes stepping up there. Both of them had experience last year playing. Campbell came in as a freshman and started the first 10 games before he eventually lost the spot to Stokes. But both of them have great experience there and should be able – I think, I really do believe that the biggest thing for Campbell – the biggest benefit for Campbell last season was losing that starting job to Stokes and, giving both of them an opportunity to play. Baker having sat out of the Sugar Bowl, both of them started that game, and both of them are going to have good experience to replace a very talented guy in DeAndre Baker. You mentioned the linebackers. Georgia's got incredible outside linebacker talent. I believe it's 3 5-stars and several 4-stars in that room. So they'll be there to replace DeAndre Walker. They've got Nolan Smith, who was the #1 overall player per the industry-generated 247 Sports Composite, as well as the #1 JUCO prospect coming in, Jermaine Johnson from Independence in Kansas. So several guys there that are going to be able to help replace the production lost in DeAndre Walker.
Hey, Palmer, you've named so many guys, and many of them are 4- and 5-star guys that are just coming into camp for the first time, that you may touch upon somebody that you've already mentioned. But I always love this question when talking to guys like you that are there at practice and on top of this team like pretty much no other. Who are those guys, regardless of the side of the ball or impact, the guys that you're really excited to see? They may be a true freshman or a redshirt freshman, or it may be somebody who's been in the program, but they need to step up and fill a gap. Maybe they were an impact player before, but now they could be a superstar, or maybe they've been on special teams, but man, they need to be a player that is going to get some starts. So one or two guys that really intrigues you that really need to show out during August.
Absolutely, and I'll give you a couple from each of the younger classes, starting with the true freshman. Nolan Smith is somebody who really excites a lot of people. Him and Nakobe Dean, who's another top-rated linebacker. He plays on the inside, whereas Smith plays on the outside. Those are two guys that Georgia fans are really excited about and really excited to see what kind of production that they can get. Nakobe Dean's was compared to guys like from guys on the team to guys that played against Roquan Smith. And so people are really excited to see what he can do. On the offensive side of the ball, I mentioned Dominic Blaylock and George Pickens. Those are the 4th and 5th rated wide receivers in the incoming class. And so with the production lost at receiver and the talent that those guys bring from high school, those are two guys that people are really excited to see on offense. In the redshirt freshman class, I think one defensive and one offensive guy people are ready to see. Azeez Ojulari at outside linebacker. Keep mentioning that room. Dan Lanning, first year defensive coordinator. He's the position coach for the outside linebackers. I think people are really excited to see what he can do with that talented group. Azeez Ojulari was mentioned by Andrew Thomas as somebody who's really stepped up and somebody that people are excited to see. And then offensively from that redshirt freshman class, Zamir White, talented guy coming out of high school, but was lost last season as he tore his ACL in preseason camp. At running back, I think Georgia fans know that he's somebody who could step up and fill that role that's being left by Elijah Holyfield in the secondary, two-man backfield alongside DeAndre Swift.
Georgia fans, their thoughts about Jake Fromm. I'm a bit curious just because here's a kid who has been locked into that game manager classification, and I think that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but I understand it's a run-first offense, and because he's not a dual-threat guy that's going to run around like a Kyler Murray and make dynamic plays with his feet, then it becomes, okay, it's a pocket passer that relies on the run first and foremost because of the style of offense and the concepts. Therefore, he's a game manager. But game managers typically aren't projected as top 10 picks in the NFL draft. Your thoughts about Jake Fromm versus what the rest of the fan base thinks of their starting quarterback?
Yeah, the game manager title is something that you've seen given to him. But, at times you've seen that given to guys like A.J. McCarron. Obviously, he had plenty of success over in Tuscaloosa, and I think Alabama fans look at him as, one of the best quarterbacks to come through there recently. So it's not a negative thing given to Fromm, but it is something that you hear oftentimes because of that run-first style. And I think this year, obviously, Jim Chaney left for Tennessee as the offensive coordinator. So Kirby Smart promoted James Coley, quarterback coach who previously served as the offensive coordinator at Miami most recently. And so I think, there's a chance that we could see this year, the passing game open up a little bit more for Fromm. He's the first upperclassman quarterback that Kirby Smart has had during his time in Athens. And so I think there's a lot of excitement to see what the new offense could look like for Fromm as a talented guy, as somebody who's being looked at highly in the NFL draft, boards and stuff. And so I think people are excited to see what the new offensive coordinator could bring. And I think the biggest thing with him is he's a leader, and he's somebody that's really going to have to push and bring along those younger receivers as they're replacing the talent and production that they lost.
We're talking up Georgia football. We got Palmer Toms on the line from Dogs 247 Sports. Please join him, the rest of the staff there. We don't have to say enough about 247 Sports. You know what the deal is there. They do it as well as anyone out there. So please join him and the rest of the staff for Georgia football coverage. Okay, Georgia fans, don't jump on me for this one because if it happens, don't look at me. If Jake Fromm goes down, the backup quarterback situation seems to be a bit precarious. Stetson Bennett's there. DeJuan Mathis, he was hurt a couple months ago. Your thoughts about where this offense would stand if Fromm goes down?
Yeah, you don't have the 5-star caliber guy behind Fromm like they had with Eason and Justin Fields recently. But I do think that Stetson Bennett, he's a guy that's been around the program for a while, He was here as a walk-on in 2017 when the team went to the national championship. Ran the scout team quarterback role, and guys from that team compared him, as guy to prepare them for games. Played phenomenally in the role of Baker Mayfield, preparing the defense for the Rose Bowl. And so I think fans are excited that he's back after a year at community college. He's back and really probably will be that backup quarterback. I think Kirby Smart would like to redshirt DeJuan Mathis if they can. Just looking at it from that perspective of, he's a guy that could be around the program for longer. Bennett coming in as a sophomore. So I think Georgia fans should not be nearly as concerned with the backup quarterback role as they are, because I believe that Stetson Bennett is a caliber guy, high caliber guy that could run the offense well. It'd be a little bit different. He's smaller. He's not necessarily as much of a pocket passer, but he knows the offense well. He's been around it. Was here for two full springs, and I think he could step in and play the backup quarterback role if needed.
Folks, I know a lot of you like to bet. Betnow.eu. And so what you need to do, if you love college football, love to put a few bucks on the games, is we've got a deal going right now with bet.eu. And also it's to help a good cause. So keep that in mind as well. You see the hashtag down in the description section below, hashtag Sam Strong. This is to help Bobby from Volunteer Roadshow, his son, 12-year-old Sam, and his medical bills with St. Jude's Hospital. So what you do is you use the link that I provided below. Use the promo code MRTVCFB, Mark Rogers TV College Football, MRTVCFB. You get an extra 50% added to your account balance. We got Palmer Toms on the line from Dogs 247 Sports, talking up Georgia football with the boys headed to camp in just a few days. Of course, with all that's been accomplished over the last few years, Alabama's in your sights. But before we get to Alabama, the Alabama question, Palmer, Florida's knocking. They think they are. I don't know if they are. I've got mixed thoughts about that, and I'll certainly have to grind it down and make my prediction a little bit later in the offseason as we head toward the season, just 4 or 5 weeks away. The game was a 1-point game early fourth quarter last year. It was a very competitive game. Then Georgia certainly showed the elite talent, and I think the depth of the roster stood the test of time in the last 10 or 12 minutes of that game. And But Florida's coming. I don't know that they're quite prepared this year with the issues that they have along the offensive line to deal with a Georgia team that's pretty stacked everywhere. But your thoughts about the Florida situation and where most Dog fans view the Gators right now?
Yeah, recently watched that game on the rerun on ESPN as they're doing the top 25 countdown. And you mentioned it. It was a close game down to the wire. Ended up being a 3-score win for Georgia. But you mentioned it. Florida was leading going into the second, late in that game. And the game was a lot closer than the score said. You look at who really scored for Georgia in that game: 2 touchdowns from Jeremiah Holloman. Big score from at the end of the first half. Isaac Nauta led him down that field for the field goal, and the red zone issues. Terry Godwin had a touchdown late in that game, and so all that production is gone for Georgia. And so, I think fans are looking at it, looking at the scoreboard and want to see, hey, we won that game by 3 touchdowns. But I would hold the horses there a little bit. I think Florida's got a talented team. You mentioned the offensive line problems. Georgia's defensive line is, not necessarily a weakness, but it's probably the weakest point of that defense in terms of, defensive line, linebacker, secondary. I think the defensive line is probably the biggest question mark on the defense. So I think it'll be a great game. Like you said, don't want to give any predictions. One thing I will say, another team that I would look out for in the SEC East is going to be Missouri. With Kelly Bryant there, they're bringing back Roundtree at running back, Albert O at tight end. That's a great offensive line, probably 3rd best in the league behind Georgia and Alabama. That's a team that I think could give Georgia a run, especially their placement on the schedule right after the Florida game and right before big matchups with Auburn and Texas A&M in November.
And Palmer, as you well know, Georgia fans only have to go back 4 or 5 years to where you experienced beating the team that won the division. But because you lost other games, you didn't win the division. That happened a few times with the likes of Missouri and some other teams, Florida in particular, where you had a really good team. You beat the team that won the division, but you lost some other games. And the only reason I bring that up is because the schedule is brutal. I had rated South Carolina with the most difficult schedule in the country. That's basically because they play Clemson, Alabama, maybe the 3 best teams in the country. But I ranked Georgia with the 2nd most difficult schedule in the country. Notre Dame, outside of the conference, and playing the 2 really good teams out of the SEC Western Division with Texas A&M and LSU. So before you can get concerned with Alabama, it's getting to the finish line and getting there with hopefully 0 or 1 loss, because that's been critical in the playoff scenario as well. But it's a tough schedule.
Right, 5 games in November, lining up with Florida, Missouri, Auburn on the road, A&M. They're lucky that they get A&M and Missouri at home in that stretch, and Florida's a neutral site game. And then finishing it out with the rivalry game against Georgia Tech. That is a brutal November. Playing three teams that are probably going to be in the top 25, potentially top 10 preseason, and 4 teams that could be ranked throughout the season in November alone.
Now we'll get to the Alabama question, Palmer. So I know Georgia fans have to be fixated on Alabama, and I get it. 2 straight years where you would win a national championship and then be playing for a national championship had you completed the mission. I understand where Alabama fans are coming from when they say, Georgia, whatever, we beat them 2 straight years. We made the plays when it counted. So I get that, but we'd like to delve a little deeper here and get to actual display on the field and performance on the field. And the performance, even though credit Alabama with making the plays that won the games, Georgia outplayed them for roughly 55 minutes both times. So this is a team that, from a talent perspective, I certainly feel that a couple of years ago, it was still about half a Mark Richt roster, which wasn't awful by any stretch. Right. It was a top 10 to 15 roster in the nation, but it was just being given that influx of those Kirby Smart recruits that were very top end, arguably best in the nation. So maybe they didn't quite have the depth late in the fourth quarter with some issues there. And obviously there were misplays, but now Kirby Smart's basically got his entire roster on the field that has just been arguably the best recruiting classes in the country. And where you've outplayed them for 2 years, and hopefully we get that showdown again. Georgia fans have to be very frustrated with what's happened, but at the same time, the class is still come in at Alabama level, and so this showdown seems inevitable again.
Yeah, and back at SEC Media Days 2 weeks ago in Hoover, the majority of the talk was about Georgia was, can they get over that hurdle? Can they get over the hurdle of Alabama? And seeing this team every day last season, seeing them in spring practice, and having seen them go toe-to-toe with Nick Saban and the Crimson Tide for the last 2 years, I do believe that Georgia can get over that hurdle. Some of it, I think, is mental. Last season in that SEC championship game, it was eerily similar. Same stadium, backup quarterback coming in. You have to think that the thoughts of the national championship slipping away, those thoughts were creeping into the minds of Georgia players as Alabama was starting their comeback. And so, like you said, Georgia has outplayed Alabama for the majority of those 2 games, and they've just let it slip. I think, they've been there. They, the offseason mantra this year is do more. And so Georgia players understand what they've done is good enough to play with Alabama, but they've got to do more to beat Alabama. And I think the difference between this year and the 2 previous teams that have played with them is that veteran quarterback in Jake Fromm. He's been there twice, been in the battles with Alabama twice, and understands what it takes to get to that point, and understands what more he has to do. An offensive line that is going to pave the way for DeAndre Swift that's been there. Kirby Smart's been there. The recruits, the talent and the depth is on the same level of Alabama. They've showed it over the past 2 years by playing with them. And, really the last hurdle that, they've got to get over to win that national championship is it's almost a mental hurdle of finishing a game versus Alabama.
Palmer, it would be ridiculous for anyone, and I've certainly challenged a few people who have online to criticize Kirby Smart, the overall job that he's done, because he's elevated a top 15 program to a top 3 or 4 program. But there obviously have been missteps in those championship games against Alabama. Do you think that, and I think there has to be a bit of leeway given to a first-time head coach in regards to now he's working on 4 years, but at the time, he, like a Dabo Swinney and now Lincoln Riley and Ryan Day at Ohio State, given the keys to an elite program as a first-time head coach at that level, has to be just a different experience. And he was learning, and certainly went through the 8-5 campaign, and then boom, national championship game. So do you think he's learned? Do you think he would make better in-game decisions than what he's been criticized for these last 2 years?
Yeah, I mean, you got to remember the biggest thing for him is he's playing with his guys now. That second year when he took the team to the national championship, a lot of that was Mark Richt talent. And so he didn't take over a bear cupboard, but he's taken the program to a different level. Recruiting wise, they've been top 3, top 4, top 5. Had the top class in 2018, number 2 this past season. Current class is ranked at number 5 for 2020. And so, the talent is there, and I think he's probably more comfortable with guys that he's bringing in versus guys that Mark Richt brought in. It's a full, this is the first time it'll be 4 recruiting classes of his guys. There's a couple of guys that were fifth-year players that are left over from Mark Richt. But, this is really the first time that it has been all Kirby's players.